Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. What is happening right now? Get out of here, you unmuted thing. Let me refresh the page here because it's not showing up my. There's the overlay. Come on, you can do it. I wonder which service is hanging right now that's causing this to be. Anyone? Huh?
Hmm.
There it is. Okay. So always an adventure on this show, never a
Oh
dull
yeah.
moment. So hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we're bringing back David Khourshid, David K. Piano himself. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm super excited to have you back on the show. I always feel like I learn a ton when you're here. But for the benefit of people who are maybe meeting you for the first time, do you want to give us a bit of a background on yourself?
Yeah, sure. So, at the very beginning, I was a pianist. I'm not pointing to the right place. There we go. Yeah. But I turned from pianist to developer. Have been a developer for about 10 years. Most recently at Microsoft, and now I'm basically starting my own thing at Stately, which is a company for making software modeling tools and services for visually modeling and analyzing application logic. So, yeah, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, it's very cool. So when you say modeling application logic, I think the a lot of us, myself included, are maybe a little fuzzy on exactly what that means. So could you give us a bit of an overview of what modeling application logic entails?
Sure. So the most basic summary is modeling application logic is what happens when you take pen and paper before you start writing any code. So
Okay.
understanding what are all the possible modes or states of my application? What are all the things that can happen in it? And that could be coming from users or other signals, such as like when you actually receive data from a fetch request. Like all of these things play together and comprise like the complex application logic that you have. And so modeling application logic is just understanding all of that both before, during, and after you actually code. And I think that the way that most developers code nowadays is just we just start coding. We're like, okay, we have a vague idea of what we want to do. So we're just going to code. And if something's wrong, then we're going to change a few Boolean expressions and then hope that right now it works. And so we're trying to argue for just sitting down with either pencil and paper or in our case with visual tooling and saying, okay, we're going to carefully plan how we want our application to be and planning it in a way that allows it to change over time because we all know like project managers are going to add features, we're going to change use cases, maybe pivot to something, so we have to be ready for that. But we think that doing it in a visual way is the best for the team. Obviously, developers don't think, well, a lot of developers do think visually, but we feel like that the visual communication mechanism is something that's universal to everyone on the team. And so we really wanted
Yeah.
to take advantage of that.
Well, and what's interesting is, as you're talking through this, I'm thinking back through my career and the things that have caused a lot of pain and a lot of frustration on my teams. Um, and the biggest one is that if I inherit an app and that app has been around for a year or more, it's inevitably gone from its original design through a few iterations. We added features, changed things up. We had to flip something around, add some security thing. And typically, it's just really hard to untangle what each of those things does. And there's a lot of like, well, we borrowed this code from this file, but it's like not technically supposed to do that. And so we're using it over here. And it's really difficult to tell what's going on. You find these giant lists of like if statements saying like, well, if this state is true, then you need to show this thing. And if this one is true, then you need to actually show a different thing. And building that mental model it's painful. It's really, really challenging.
Oh yeah, it
Um,
is, and it's mainly because like code is really not the best medium for expressing those thoughts.
mhm. That yeah, that makes sense. And okay. Now I'm even thinking a step further to where
Mm,
how did I unblock this, right? I would go grab everybody who worked on the app and I'd say, okay, we got to figure this thing out.
yeah.
Can you talk me through how this works? And we'd end up at a whiteboard and we're drawing little flow charts and diagrams and well, this thing talks to this thing and it goes over here like this. And at the end of it,
Yeah.
we've done a very poor job of visually modeling our application logic. And so what you're proposing is that rather than waiting a year and then being frustrated and then having to pull an all hands meeting to get everybody to like explain their little corner of the app, you're saying just do that from the get-go.
Exactly. And do it in a way. So obviously we could do it from the get-go right now. We could be diligent about writing user stories, writing documentation, and creating these diagrams to explain our app. But first of all, do you know any company? I mean, you work in Netlify. Do you know any company that actually does that religiously and is actually in sync with, changes to the app? And like that's extremely difficult to do.
I mean, I would say that Netlify is probably the best I've seen at being good at this, and it's still, we build stuff and then we write some docs about what we built, and the docs are good, but they're surface level API, not like deep internal implementation, and they always drift a little bit because people have to fix something pretty fast. So the documentation, if we make diagrams, those diagrams are dead seconds after they're published.
Yeah. And that is like immediately our selling point where anything you create, one of our team members calls it speculative artifacts. That's Laura Kalbeck's term, and I love that term because it's like these are artifacts, these diagrams or documentation that they're not very long lived. Like once you change a feature or do something different, it's out of date.
And that's interesting because it changes the value of those things, right? It doesn't mean they're not valuable, but it means that you don't get to use them as a source of truth anymore. You use them as an iterative step toward your source of truth. Like I'm going
Mhm.
to draw this diagram and then I'm going to build the thing. And as soon as I
Yeah.
built the thing, the diagram's now trash. It's a throwaway. It was a planning step.
Yeah.
And so are you proposing that there's a way to make non-speculative artifacts about visualizing your app code?
Yeah, and I mean, this has been something that's existed for many years, and it's called it has two terms like visual formalisms and executable diagrams, and those go hand in hand. So basically, we're saying we could visualize the code in a diagram, and so now we have a visual output that's always going to be in sync with the code. And these diagrams are actually executable and formalized, which means like they're not just like, oh, here's sort of a hand wavy, version of how the app works, but more like this is an exact representation of how the app works, and this is always going to be in sync with the code. And so our idealized goal is that you should be able to edit the code and have the diagram updated, so always in sync. And here's the magic: going the other way around, editing the diagram and have the code updated as a result, or at least have a very clear picture of where the code needs to be updated to, for everything to be in sync. So we need to basically remove the barrier of creating documentation and diagrams and coding the implementation details and having those be separate, and instead like have those be under the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's because as you're talking about this, I'm realizing I can only think of one example that's not what we're talking about today that does this. And it's not even a full implementation of what you're talking about because it's not two-way, but GraphQL is
Hmm.
about the only thing I can think of where when you write the code, it automatically updates the documentation and makes sure that, when people go to look at that graphical explorer, they see exactly what's in the code. It's very difficult to get out-of-date docs with a GraphQL API because the documentation and the code are the same thing. And so what you're saying is that with this kind of visual representation that you're talking about, we are drawing this diagram, but the diagram is the code and the code is the diagram, so that no matter which part of it we work on, we're always technically working on the same thing. It's just a view of the same underlying structure.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So you
Oh,
could
that's
think about
super
it
cool.
basically as GraphQL, but for application logic. And that's what I love about GraphQL too, how it automatically generates like the schema, the documentation, the types, everything. And so that never goes out of date. It's impossible for it to. So we want to do the same thing for app logic.
I mean, this is one of those things that as you're setting it up, my brain is going, nah, it's too good to be true. Right? Like, yeah, this is gonna be great until somebody has a deadline and they're gonna get lazy and they're gonna cut a corner and then it's all broken. So is this something that is gonna like, I talk a lot about the idea of setting good defaults. Like, you make the right thing the easy thing, and then when people cut corners, they do the thing you want them to do. And so it sounds like you're hinting at that maybe this is that, where you're giving people an ability to, the shortcut is the thing that's actually the best for long-term documentation and visibility into what's going on in the code.
So yeah, are you talking about like how people actually author these diagrams and state machines and state charts?
Yeah, and I know we'll look into the specifics of how we author them, but the promise that you're making here is that, like, for me, the easiest thing to do would be to go like draw a little arrow on my diagram and say, okay, everybody go implement that. But what you're saying is I can go and just put the arrow into the flowchart and it updated the code for me.
Yeah, exactly that. And that's the northern star of what we want to get to.
That's pretty incredible. And it really does it makes the right thing the easy thing by saying, like, look, you need to update everything at once. And the way you do that is by updating this one thing that's very visual and human readable. And that's going to trickle into the whole application logic properly and consistently. That is really, really interesting and a very cool promise. So how did you get into this space? Like, where did you find yourself, from being a pianist to being this visual application architect?
Yeah, so one of my first jobs as a junior developer, we were working on just these really gnarly medication prescribing forms that had multiple steps. So anyone who's made a multi-step form knows immediately what I'm talking about. There's just so many things to think about. And these aren't just your typical run-of-the-mill sequential multi-step forms, like where you do step one, then step two, then step three, and then review, complete. It's more like you could go back a step, you could do different flows depending on what the user chooses. And even in each step, depending on what the user chooses, like which radio button they press, you might show a different field. I know probably a lot of people watching right now have heartburn just hearing all of this, but yeah, like I wanted some way as a junior developer, especially, and a lazy junior developer at that, I wanted some way of, just better representing that, because we had a huge mess of like Boolean logic and everything was being done in jQuery. We didn't even use a framework back then. So I was just, curious, researching different things. I discovered, oh, there's a formal term for this called state machines. So I started researching that. Then I found out, oh, there's this thing called state charts, which are like state machines, but cooler and with more features. And you could express even more complex logic, but not in a way that makes the complexity blow up and become completely like confusing. So I sort of took that idea and ran with it, or at least as far as I could in that company. But then they were like, hey, you're technically, this is technically our software. And since you're no longer with this company, your open source project is not allowed to be open source. So they sort of took that down. I had to start from scratch at the next company. And those ideas evolved into me wanting to experiment with state machines and state charts as a generalized library. And so that's how I made XDates, and then more and more people started using it. And then here we are.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, you've kind of cornered the market on state machines. I think if anybody says state machines 3 times, your name will get invoked almost immediately. And
it only takes one time.
The alert goes off.
Exactly.
No, I mean, it's been really fascinating to watch how this is kind of matured, because I know that Stately is not the first visual state machine creator that you've made, right? Or I guess you had a visualizer, not a visual creator.
Right. Sorry. Right. Yeah. And so even in our previous shows, and I'm really excited to show you the new visualizer too. But we had previous iterations of like the visualizer, and so those were useful for you're creating a state machine and you want to actually visualize it and play around with it, maybe show designers or other project managers, stakeholders, etc. But those tools eventually evolved into actual inspectors. So if you're using state machines in your application, you want to be able to visualize the state as someone is using the application. Obviously, in dev mode, you don't want to use this in prod. But yeah, so now we're just going a level beyond that, and just giving you the ability to create these state machines visually.
Yeah, it's super cool. Okay, so the promise of state machines is pretty stark here, right? Like we can see it, we see how the app looks. We can put that up in a way that's discussable, not just with engineers, but with the whole company. If you click this button, this thing will happen. Like, does everybody
Yes.
agree that's the right way for this to go? And so I guess when is there what are the trade-offs of this? When are you not going to use state machines?
That's a very good question. So I like to say that two things. First, if you have a simple enough app, like basically any CRUD app, even though I would argue some CRUD apps need state machines too, or just an app that does something really simple and doesn't need this concept of different modes or anything like that, then you don't need a state machine. But what I will also say is that apps that start simple seldom stay simple. And that's because as you add more features and use cases, the app grows in complexity. And something that I hear pretty often is eventually developers get to the point of, I wish I used a state machine for certain parts. I mean, you could even look at like your own side projects or apps you're working on, and you're going to see a mess of like just Boolean conditional logic where it's really hard to discern what is the intention behind this code. I will say that like one of the biggest, I don't want to call it a drawback, but just like things to consider with state machines and state charts is the learning curve. Like I do say your entire team has to be on board. Thankfully, it's not that hard to learn, just the general concept of state machines. But if your entire team isn't on board with it, then you're going to end up creating something where someone else is going to say, this looks really over engineered, when in reality, it's the opposite. Like if you're not using any sort of modeling, whether it's state machines or just anything else, then it's really under engineering. So yeah, just make sure everyone's on board.
And you've put this in a way that I've heard in the past where not writing a state machine, as you're saying, is under engineering, but it's also like when I deploy something, there are a whole bunch of unknown states, and I'm just trusting that we won't get into any of those, and like trusting all the people who work on the application later to also know what those unknown states are and how to handle them. And I'm trying to remember the exact phrasing you used, but it was around this idea of like uh, make impossible states impossible is I think how you said
Yes.
it. And
Yep.
that's with Boolean logic, it's really easy to mess this up where you have an if error and an if loading and an if loaded, and if you combine those incorrectly, you can accidentally get into a state where you are both loading and loaded, or where you have an error and you have data because you didn't do your Boolean checks right, or you forgot to
Yeah.
return or something like that.
Yeah, and so what's funny is developers, sometimes they hear that and they're like, you know what, I'm a Boolean expert. Like I know how to, wrangle my Booleans so that they don't get in those impossible states. But here's the reality: I encounter apps like this every day where they do get into impossible states, and users don't report it. They just either, I don't know, hard refresh the app, best case scenario, or they just leave and use a different app because they're like, okay, this one's broken, I'm not going to use it. So like it's not something that you're aware of until it's too late, really. And so that's another common, I want to say, or I don't want to say criticism, but just thing that when people start using state machines, they feel like, wow, this is really complex, but it's revealing complexity. It's not doing like, the thing where abstractions would hide complexity. It puts it right in front of you. So you could say, oh, I forgot to handle that case or this transition, or wow, I didn't realize that these states were impossible.
That's that's a good idea, because what I like about that is it's I in a completely non-programming context, something that I talk about a lot is setting good expectations, because a lot of what we do is implicit. If we go to dinner, it might be implicit that we're going to split the bill, but if we misunderstand that, then one of us is expecting to split, the other one's expecting not to pay, and now you've got discomfort. Whereas if you would just set those expectations up front, it doesn't change the outcome of the meal, it doesn't change the information, it just exposes it before something's happened that is now uncomfortable, right? And the same is
Right.
true with our app logic. if we look through and actually map out what our app is allowed to do and not allowed to do and what states it can get into, that can feel like a lot of code, but those things were all there. All of that
Yes.
possibility was there. We just didn't write it down.
Yeah, and now you're better equipped to handle it. And so it's not just for the developers to understand, like, oh, okay, well, now I see all my, states, and they're up, up close and personal with me. Like, it now becomes something that you could communicate with the rest of your team. And that's like the important thing that I also want to stress is that this sort of escapes the developer bubble and allows you to tell your designers, like, hey, here's all of the different visual states that we didn't consider, or just confirm use cases with your project manager and have them also be able to understand, like, oh, okay, here's all of the possible ways that the user can use this app. And we could easily do things like list features, list edge cases, change features, just in confidence.
And that's actually really, really interesting because we have on the Netlify team, we've got some of our UX designers, and they are effectively human state machine checkers, right? They have to go through every flow in the app and think about, well, what if somebody clicks this button and then immediately hits the back button, right? Like, what
Right.
state does that get us into, or something like that? And they have to do all of this work, which is effectively manual QA, which that is, it works most of the time. We've got
Hmm.
great designers, but it does rely on somebody paying attention. And we all know, like, everybody at some point is going to miss something or cut corners or whatever. So having that explicitness where we can look at it together and say, do we have a screen design for this state in the flowchart? No? Okay, we should design one of those, right? Like, it's much easier
Yeah.
to communicate about. It basically gives us a checklist of how the UX should work and what do the buttons need to say and all those things. We can follow it through. We're not doing that thing that I'm super guilty of having like a homepage and a login, and then I show the dashboard and they're like, but what about like you click the login button and then you got to actually log in? What if you don't have an account? You got to sign up. Like, what happens if you were on a different page and then you click login and then you get redirected to that page? All that stuff, like, eventually we'll talk about it. It would be better to map that up front so that everybody knew what we were getting into design wise. It helps with scoping, hitting deadlines, all those things. So I'm actually seeing this as an estimation tool as well.
Yeah, yeah, it could definitely be that too. For like, I like to think of it as part of like all parts of the development cycle, both planning during actual development so that you understand what you need to implement, even things like producing those artifacts, documentation, and diagrams, but also testing. And I mean, I could talk about for hours just on the testing part, but you could essentially generate tests from this, or at least know exactly what's to test, because to get into mathematical terms, your app becomes a directed graph. And so all of these tests are just testing each path in the directed graph. And all of these features are just like nodes and edges of this graph.
Fascinating.
So, yeah.
This is really cool stuff. Okay, so we have one question from the chat that I wanted to ask, which is, does something like XState replace state management in your app? So would this be used in addition to Redux or in place of Redux?
Oh, this is a really good question, and this is something that I really ought to write a blog post about, because it follows up from the initial question of, like, when do you use state machines? And so I want to differentiate that XState is a state orchestration library, whereas other libraries such as Redux, MobX, Zustand, Recoil, those are state management libraries. So the biggest difference, and they do overlap in a lot of parts, but the biggest difference is that state management libraries provide you a convenience box or a set of boxes, depending on how they're implemented, where you could hold your state and do whatever you want with that state. So it's unopinionated. It's just, give me your states. I'm going to give you a really convenient way to change it whenever you want, which that's a bit scary, but also to retrieve it wherever you want. So XState takes a different approach. It's like, okay, I can hold your state if you want to, but I'm more an orchestrator. I say, like, here's all of the finite states. Here's how those states can go between each other. And so, it dictates, like, what events are possible in each state, how the state can change, what can happen in the future, which is something that's impossible to do with state management tools just because you don't have that information. It's just a box. Like, who knows what's going to happen when you mutate this part of the state or send this event over. So, as a state orchestration library, You definitely can use it standalone to also encompass your state management, but you don't have to. And so I think one of the most important examples of this is forms. There's plenty of good form libraries. And so you could definitely use xstate as something to orchestrate. Okay, we're in the shipping information states, we're in the checkout information, the cart state. Like I'm just describing a shopping cart. Xstate can tell us which mode we're in or which state we're in. And then we could leave it to form libraries to hold that form state and communicate it back with the orchestrator and say, here's my data. What do I do next?
Got it. Yeah. So really, it's a kind of an it depends, as it always is,
Yeah.
Chad. But it can be used standalone, or it can be used in combination with a state management library.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Okay, so I could probably pester you with a lot of abstract questions, but I think it's going to be more fun to see this in action. So let's switch over into our pair programming view here. Camera 2. And what we're going to do now is just do a quick shout out to our captioning. We've got Ashley with us today from White Coat Captioning, doing all the captions on the homepage. You can find those at learnwithjason.dev. Let me drop these into the chat here. And that is made possible through the support of our sponsors, Netlify, NX, and Backlight, all kicking in to make this show more accessible and to help me run all the other great things that we're able to do here. Thank you very much for that. All these links are clickable, so make sure you go and check those out. We are talking to David today, so we are going to go over to David K. Piano on Twitter. Make sure you go and give him a follow. And then we're talking about Stately, is it .ai? Is that right? Yes.
Yes, stately.ai.
So this is the company that you're starting now.
Mm-hmm.
And should I have anything else pulled up, or is this a good starting point?
This is definitely a fine starting point. In fact, it's a very bare bones landing page that I made in all of half an hour. It is deployed on Netlify, so shout out to them. And yeah, so it's sort of a teaser on like what we're working on, and we are coming out with the new landing page soon. But if you want, you could jump into stately.ai/viz, and I want to show you the new visualizer we have.
Okay, here we go.
So, yeah. And you could, go ahead and click stuff if you want, like, click maybe an example machine. So if you click see an example, then that's going to give you a machine. So if you click visualize now, you're going to see this visualized. And so this is your basic fetch machine. You could immediately start like just playing around with it, click fetch, resolve, retry, reject, whatever you want. And this actually has logic where I think it's going to do something if you reject it too many times or not. I haven't looked at this machine in a while. But yeah, long story short, it takes your xstate code and allows you to visualize it.
This is very cool. Like I love and it's just so nice to see how straightforward this is, right? And we immediately know what's going on. We're going to get something, and then when it's loading, it either works or it doesn't, and then we can retry it if we want. And it looks like with the retries, yeah, you get the number of retries, and it looks like the logic to fail on a number of retries isn't here, but this is, and so, okay, so here's the visualization, here's the code, and this is all of the code. So 39 lines of code total. Let me make this a little bit bigger so we can see all of them. And David, I don't know if I told you this, but if you look at the screenshot in the call you're in, there's going to be a kebab menu on the screen share. You can open that in a new tab. It'll be full screen.
Perfect.
But yeah, a little easier to see. So we can see here that we've got, we're creating a machine, and then, okay, an ID, we give it a name, initial, I'm going to guess that's the initial state. Here's our list of states. So here's our idle state, loading state, success, and failure. We can see idle, loading, success, and failure. And then each of these, here's fetch, resolve, and reject. So there's these actions here. And then we've got a retry, right? So we can, I'm like, I'm passingly familiar with state machines. I've used them in a couple projects. It's not a core competency for me, but you can sort of reason your way through what's going on here, both visually very easily, and in the code, it's pretty straightforward. So this is, I mean, this is really cool. Like I'm a fan here of how this is working.
Awesome.
Getting some props on the visualizer in the chat.
So yeah. So for the past, like, I don't know how long I've been working on XState, 6 years or so. It's definitely been a code first tool where you write the code to make the state machine and then you visualize it. But something we recently released in beta is actually the Stately editor. So if you go to stately.ai/editor, you're going to be taken to a completely different experience right now. And so it's
Ooh, okay.
this thing right here, where I mean, it looks just like the visualizer, but here's the difference. You could visually create these state machines now. So inside machine name, if you double click somewhere, that's going to create a new state. Well, so inside, like, where all the other states are. Yeah,
Oh,
so if
wow.
you double
Okay.
click,
All right.
you could start typing, yeah, third states. Then you could, like, click one of the white boxes and, like, just drag an arrow from one to the other. Start typing that event. You could drag things around. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and then if you press simulate, then you could actually walk through the states just like you can with the editor. Just go from first state to second state to third state, and there's no transition back to first state. So you basically
Yeah.
made a broken traffic light. So
Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay. So then I go back to
yeah.
edit. And if I wanted to fix that, I want to be able to go around. So I'm just
Yeah.
going to come back out here, simulate now. Boom, boom, boom. We're able to cycle through our app.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
Okay.
okay, you just made a state machine, at least visually, in a few seconds. And this right now is a visual artifact, but if you go to export, then you could let's actually copy that JSON. Oh, you do have to sign in via GitHub. Yay, one more user.
All right. So I'm going to export.
Yeah, just click JSON. It's going to copy to the clipboard. And
Okay.
let's go back to the visualizer. So stately.ai/viz. And so, yeah, type create machine and then just copy pasted that entire big JSON thing into there. So now if you press either command enter or click the visualize button, hopefully it's going to be the same. Yeah, there we go. So this sort of proves that this machine that you created visually can be used directly in code. So you could, just export that and use it directly.
This is really cool. Like it's so nice that we didn't have to, like, I didn't have to set up the boilerplate of naming it and stuff. And now if I go back to this, let's go back to the editor, right? We can create one of these and, like, I can give it a name. We'll call it, you said you had an idea for what we could build. Did you want to look at something else before we start building one?
So yeah, my idea was to build the beginning of Wordle.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah, I don't know if we have time to, like, do all of Wordle, but at least we could do, like, just the basic mechanism. And so this is actually a great example, and I know that there were people talking about it in the chat, but games use state machines all the time, and Wordle is no exception. So I'm sure you've played Wordle, the entire world has played Wordle, and there's definitely certain states in that game. So there's a state where you're guessing, and you have 5 letters that you need to type in. And those are all individual events as well. You should only be able to press one letter at a time, or backspace is going to remove your most recent letter. And then when you press enter or whatever, then it's going to do this sort of revealing animation. And I know that we did animations in the past episode, but yeah, we have that revealing state where you can't type a letter. And then after that is revealed, then either you won, like if you actually guessed the word, you lost if you had 6 tries already, or otherwise you just go back to the guessing state. So it's
Right.
definitely a state machine, and I found it to be a pretty cool example of one that we could make.
Yeah. Okay, so let's do it. So the initial state, the convention is idle, right?
Yeah, but so when I jump into a Wordle game, it actually takes you, as long as you're not in the, like, here's how to play the game screen, you're in the guessing state. So I would call it guessing.
Guessing. Okay. And then
Yeah.
do you have a convention on like, I'm sure it doesn't really matter, but do you see like, do people capitalize, not capitalize, all caps?
So it's funny because with this you could really do whatever you want. Personally, I like to keep things lowercase and camel case just because it's been ingrained in my head as a programmer to do that. Um, One of the engineers on our team, he loves doing sentence case. So he makes this like English prose and it looks really nice. It reads really nice. But it's a bit interesting putting that in code just because it feels like two different worlds. So I
Sure.
like just doing the lowercase camel case thing.
Okay, let's do it. I'm lowercase, and then our first event is going to be, um,
So when let's call it like when we submit a guess because we could type one. So you could call it, I guess, submit.
okay,
Yeah. Then we're going to be going into the revealing states, and this is where all the letters. I forget what they do. They sort of animate. They flip to the different colors, either green if it's correct, and yellow, or just black. Um,
right,
And
right.
then, so after that revealing state is done, and that's going to happen, just after some time. So what you could actually do is go ahead and, yeah, you already have that event selected. In events type on the right, let's choose a delayed event, or it's going to say after. So after, and we'll just do it after 2 seconds. So you could put 2000 for that delay.
Okay,
Yeah, and then we could change the target. Now you could do it in the right, but you could also drag that little circle back to guessing. Yeah, and I mean that's going to be our simple state machine for now. So eventually we're going to add just more conditions onto it, but like this is I think it's a pretty good starting point. So other things you could do is in the guessing states. I don't know if it's actually going to simulate the timer in here. We haven't
okay,
implemented that just yet, but in the guessing state, you could also have a key or have a backspace. So there's actually three events that could happen in the guessing states. So you could make an event to itself, just drag one of those boxes and go right back to the same state. Um,
oh, okay, I'm doing this wrong. Hold on. Let me
no,
go
it's a
here. Wait, where did I go? Let me get this one out of here. Okay, so I'm going to do
yeah.
this back to itself.
There you go. So now just type, I guess, key, and so that's when we press a key,
Okay,
and then there's another event that could happen, which is backspace or delete, whatever you want to call it. Yeah.
okay, so we've got our backspace. So we've got key entry and we've got delete, both of which go into our guessing.
hmm
Okay.
Yeah. So the tricky part about this logic is that our after 2000 milliseconds thing, that's the time where like after it's done doing its revealing animation, we have to determine do we go back to the guessing state or do we go to a win or a lose state. So let's create two more states, win and lose. And yeah, so one, I guess, more advanced feature, and of course, since this is in beta, this is something we're still working on. If you click the after 2000 milliseconds, um, we could add conditions. So if you click plus,
Oh,
just right
plus.
above that event, then we have if, and so I would say that if, and you could type just like plain English over here, like if guess is correct, then we're going to go to the win state. Yeah. And so I guess if we move things around, or you could do that. Awesome. So now let's add another one because we also need to see if else like what would we call it? Like if guesses are exhausted or is sixth guess? Yeah,
I
that
mean,
works
this
too.
is a little like that's not future proof because maybe we allow 7 guesses in the future. Or yeah, like
Exactly.
if
So
out of guesses.
there we go. Yeah.
That way we don't have to edit that later. And then that one would go to, I'm going to click this and I drag it. Is
So
it this one? This one.
yeah, there you go. And then one more. So otherwise, we're just going to go back to guessing. So, uh, yeah, you could
Oh,
actually delete that because it's just an else.
oh, I got it. Else. And then
Yep.
that's going to take us back to guessing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So we
Yeah.
can put this
So
one here and this one here so that we can see them a little more easily. I guess we could even look, we can make our flow chart nice and clean.
yeah, and I'm actually working on making these lines a lot prettier too. There's a whole lot of things that we're going to be adding to this editor, including visual improvements. Like we want this to be both a development tool and a design tool. So if you want to color the win state green and the lose state red, like you should be able to do that. If you also want to drag and drop images for prototyping or mockups into any of these states, then you should also be able to do that. Those are just some things coming to the future. So now you could take this to, I don't know, your designer, your project manager, and go ahead and click simulate and be like, hey, I have this great low seven-figure million dollar idea for a very popular word game, and I want to show you how it's going to work. So you say the user, submits a guess, it's revealing, and so oh yeah, so I guess after transitions aren't working over here, again, we could like just uh, implement this in code or whatever. It's something that needs to be fixed, but you could just show them this diagram and say like, hey, here's how our app is going to work, our little Wordle machine. And speaking about like just having this as a documentation tool, if you go back to edit, we could click any one of those states or events. So yeah, you could put a description. And in the future, this is going to be full markdown, so you could put images, text formatting. Yeah. And so you could clarify like what each of these different states mean.
Oh, this is
So
dope.
yeah.
Right? Like we can tell what's going on in a way that's yeah. And like this is really delivering on that promise of, this is it's a communication tool. Being
Mm-hmm.
able to go in here and show people what's going on. I'm already thinking even and like, okay, earmuffs, David. Even if I didn't use the state machine, right? Like you could use this as a way to plan your apps and then give that to your team for development. Like I think that's I think that's a sign that you're onto something good where even if you only use half of it, it's still super useful.
Yeah, and I will definitely admit and agree with you on that we don't want this to be a tool where it's like, hey, this is only useful if you're using X states. We want this to be a tool where it doesn't matter which state management library you're using, this should still be useful to you in some form, either as a documentation tool, a planning tool, a visual tool, simulation, whatever, it shouldn't matter. And that's why we want to definitely expand this for use cases of just any framework, any state management library, and in the future, even other languages as well. So I just want to make that clear. This is not an X state only tool.
Yeah. Well, and so kind of in that vein, there's a question from the chat. I'm not going to try to pronounce your username. I'm sorry, but the what is the best way to integrate this at the back end level so that you can take advantage of state machines without relying on the client side?
Oh, that's a huge conversation. And actually, we had someone recently join the team working on this exact same problem because one emergent use case that we've seen come up is people wanting to use XState for all sorts of things, whether it's automation, CI/CD, even backend workflows. And we think that state charts are a really powerful way of expressing complex workflows in the backend. There's a lot of considerations there. I mean, there's just so much because not only do you have to keep states, but you also have to just execute actions and timers. I know Netlify recently came out with their cron job scheduler, so I mean that's also an important consideration in workflows too. So that's something that we're actually actively working on, and in the future, we want to make this editor something where you could drag and drop different services. So one of the states could be send an email or check the weather. And then you have a nice, pretty deploy button where you just say, hey, I want this to actually be an endpoint where I could send events to it and it's going to do the things in my workflow. So I just want to say that all of that stuff is coming soon and we're working on it really diligently.
I see M Pocock in the chat is asking if I want Snap too. Yes, I definitely do. I'm sure he just watched me trying to get these all lined up.
Hey, Matt.
No, I like this is great. I am absolutely thrilled with how quickly we were able to model out. I know that there's stuff missing. We don't have the like 6 key presses before you submit kind of thing. But this is really fascinating to see how quickly we were able to get a thought out of your head visually on screen in a way that is, I would say, borderline universally comprehensible. Like this is it would be hard for anybody who is, at least somewhat capable of logical thought and reading English to look at this and not know what's going on. And I think that's so powerful.
Yeah, and it's mainly because we see code as something where, in order to make code understandable, first of all the developers have to have had a hand in writing the code, because usually the only person who understands the code fully is the developer who wrote it. And sometimes that's not even the case. Like 2 weeks later, they go on vacation, they look at their code, and they're like, I have no idea what this is. Did I write this? Oh, I checked the git blame. I did write this. And it becomes a problem. And like you could put
Which
comments
one
in the
of you
code.
monsters did this to us? It was
Exactly.
me.
Yeah. So, we really wanted a medium where it's first and foremost visual, like just this idea of boxes and arrows. Like you could talk to a child and say, hey, you follow the arrow. So when you see an event, just follow the arrow. Which box are you on now? Like these are things that are really simple to teach. And so by describing your application like this too, you could also simulate it. You could hook it up to like mock-ups, maybe Figma, things like that.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is, I mean, and what I also think is interesting about this is like you mentioned Figma. Figma has this prototyping tool, right? And so
Yeah.
something interesting that could be done here is you could build a direct integration where you've got your state machine here, and then that creates Figma prototypes that are like, yeah, design here. This is the box that you click to go to this, to submit the form. This is the box you click to do this thing, and you can just kind of see how that would work and how quick that designer flow would be, where basically the whole team can define the logic, and then the designers don't have to spend time wiring up prototypes. They just have to fill in the blanks in the prototype.
Yeah, exactly. Or even the other
And
way around. Yeah. So
oh,
I've worked with designers where they were the ones who created these user flows, and they were like, hey, we made these really pretty boxes and arrows in Figma, which aren't functional, but they look extremely clear into like you need to go here, and then when the user logs in, now you're in the login page or the welcome page, whatever. And we're thinking of like making this a tool for even designers to go in, make their user flows in it, and hand it over to the developer to either refine that logic or, like you said, fill in the blanks. So either designers can fill in the blanks with designs, or developers can fill in the blanks with implementation details, or both. So this becomes a common language, sorry, for the entire team.
yeah, I mean, I you'd think that I would use state machines in every project, because every time we talk, I'm like, man, this is definitely the way that I should be building everything.
Right.
Because it really does. I'm like it's there, like everything that you
Mhm.
want to be there, in the way that you cross functionally communicate, in the way that you keep things up to date. Because I want to try something. I'm gonna go rogue here. I'm gonna copy this. I'm gonna go over to. Oh, I have a question. Is there any way that I'm gonna be able to import JSON over here if I were to try to like edit this machine and then bring it back?
Um, in the future, you will be able to, but
Okay.
right now, no. I mean, yeah, it's fine. So, we're actually working on a VS Code extension. Matt, who's probably in the chat, has been working on this. Yeah, a lot, and you could do like sort of that two-way editing, but we don't have it synced up where it actually saves it in the cloud just yet. But that's definitely on our priority list to have pretty soon.
Gotcha. Question in the chat about adding a second machine. So if you wanted to like have one machine and then that talk to another machine, is that a how does that pattern work?
So I mean, in XState, that's pretty straightforward. You either invoke or spawn, but over here we don't have that feature quite yet. Again, one of our priorities is just getting the full feature set of XState within the editor, and so we still have a long laundry list of things to do to support everything. But yeah, it would just be that same idea of you click a state, you click invoke, and then you pick from a drop down of existing machines you have, and then you just talk to it that way. And eventually the simulator will be able to show, hey, this machine is sending an events to that machine, or this machine received an event from another machine.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
And so like it's pretty early days for Stately, right? Like how far are you into this journey?
We are like in terms of a company, we have been
Yeah.
around for a little over half a year. So I honestly really love our team because it's amazing what we've been able to accomplish in just half a year of being alive. Like it was just May of last year that I quit Microsoft and started doing this full time. So it's definitely been less than a year that we were able to do all of this. But we have a lot of future plans, and at least for the stately editor, it's definitely still early days. And so I want to thank everyone who has been kicking the tires and playing around with this. Like first of all, keep it up, keep making cool stuff. And secondly, we're going to be adding a lot of cool new features to this and just working on bigger ideas that also incorporates the visualizer and the editor and all of these other things that we're building, such as workflows and model-based testing and simulation, and just all of these ideas that become possible with state machines and state charts.
It's yeah. I mean, this is an impressive amount of what 6-7 months. That is a lot of progress. I can see there's no shortage of ideas. Is there
No.
somewhere that you want people to go as they're having these ideas so that they're collected somewhere?
Yeah, so we have a Discord. It's discord.gg/xstate. That's XSTATE. And yeah, we have a very vibrant community there. There are a lot of people. Like one thing that I love about this community is that there's just no shortage of ideas. It's not just people asking for help, but also people saying like, "Hey, it would be cool if we could do this," or "I see possibilities for doing this and that, and using state machines for home automation or chatbots or things like that." There's always exciting conversations, and pretty much never any arguments either, just because this is based on some really really old stuff. So it's like you're not going to argue with the paper from the 1970s or 1980s. That stuff's already written in stone, and we're just building on top of that.
Nice. Yeah, I mean it is good to see that, we're not reinventing wheels with state
No.
machines. We're just implementing the spec in different languages and,
Right.
seeing a JavaScript implementation of state machines in XState, or somebody was requesting Rust, and, there's just a lot of ways that you're but ultimately the logic, that JSON object that describes how things communicate, that's portable. If you build
Hmm.
a state machine interpreter in Rust, the the JSON would look exactly the same. Well,
Exactly.
assuming the language you're using has a JSON representation of things, but what very similar, I should say. No matter where you are, it's going to look familiar, and that is something that I think is really interesting. Where it's not, well, we're going to build this brand new thing and then we have to convince everybody to use the brand new thing, and then after we convince people to use it, we have to go port it to all these different places. This is more
Right.
saying like, well, this thing exists, we're just trying to
Hmm.
explain why it's going to make your life easier. We don't have to reinvent wheels. Like the work is done, we just have to get people on board.
Exactly. That's exactly it.
All right, so we have about a half hour left on the clock. What else should we show off about the way that all of this stuff works?
Yeah. So I actually it was late last night, and that's why I thought of the Wordle game. But I was like, how quickly could I make Wordle, or at least a very ugly version of it, using X states, using the same, or like a similar machine to what we created. And I actually pasted a link to you in the the video program that we're using.
Great. Let me grab this.
Now, fair warning, I do love CSS, but again, it was a challenge to me to make this in under half an hour. So styling is a bit lacking. And so you could see that we have basically the same, actually the exact same structure of state machine.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know why I called it toggle machine. I was just using the xstate template, which, by the way, if you go to github.com/statelyai/xstate, you're going to see templates for anything you would want to use xstate in, or most anything, whether it's React, Vue, Svelte, JavaScript, TypeScript. Yeah. So I guess the main GitHub page. This xstate page is another one of those. I created this in 10 minutes because I needed something there. So yeah, sorry, if you go to the README.
To the README.
Yeah. So just going back, and if you scroll down beyond packages, just to templates, these are all code sandbox templates where if you want to get up and running really quickly with xstate, just click one of those and start playing around with it. And so this one is the JavaScript React templates where, we're taking our Wordle machine, and I made a very simple unstyled version of it. And so if you scroll down to the state machine, you're going to see that things are very familiar. We have our 3 events, which is the key, the backspace, the submit, and then we have the other states that we created. So we have the revealing states, which if you scroll down, we have our 3 conditions over there, exactly what we did. And then we have two states at the end, won and lost. They don't really do much of anything because Wordle just says, okay, you won, here's your stats. And, that's something that you could definitely add on later to this. But yeah, so that's our machine. We just put the guesses and states, did some things to show it. So if you try not to cheat and look at the answer, but yeah, go ahead and try playing this.
All right, so let's see.
You actually can't click the letters, and that's something that I forgot to do. It's not a bug or anything.
So I just have to type.
Yeah. So
all right, so you're all about to see my my actual strategy here. Okay,
yeah,
so
again,
we've got
the styling is terrible, and I'm sorry about that.
It's all good. Okay, so let's see. IR in the wrong places. Let's go with what's a good word?
This is exciting.
Risk, right? Okay, so the RI still in the wrong place. Okay, so let's I feel like the chat probably cheated. Let's go with BRISK. Okay, what am I gonna do? We're gonna get
It's interesting to see how other people play Wordle. I'm actually a very infrequent player.
Rift. Oh.
There you go.
Nicely done. Well played. No, but this is super fun. Like, I love it. And okay, so let's look total, all things considered. We built this, or you built this. I don't know why I'm using collective pronouns here. You built this in 214 lines of code because this is a single file, right?
Yeah, one file.
Yeah. So 214 lines of code, we've got Wordle implemented. So let's take a look at I want to see the application logic here. So we've got letter status, and so this is correct or almost unplayed. Okay, good. And with this, is this in that's just checking the letter status here. So we use our machine, we get our state, we get the ability to send an action. And then we turn on the
don't worry about the active stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's from the old example. Yeah.
Guess and guesses. And then let's go look at the code here. So we've got the template, we've got the state. So the current state right now is we won. And then we take our guesses and we just map through if it is correct, it's green. If it's almost, it's orange. Nope, it's gray. Then good. Then we go through the full, let's see, we've got our flex here. And this is the keyboard layout. So all the
Yeah.
keys. Good.
That was
And
actually
then
really
same thing
fun
here.
that was fun to type. You just take one finger and go like this on the keyboard, and there you go.
I love it. I love it. And then we go into, there's the bottom of the keyboard. And then when you submit, you submit. And so what's really fascinating about this is that this mostly just looks like markup. But
Yeah.
what's cool is that in each of these, we just get to pass in the state to figure
Mhm.
out what the letters are doing. So looking up at this letter status, we're able to say, is the, does the guess exist and all that stuff. And each of these is able to happen because we're in, like, this is our whole logic.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So besides the letter status stuff, all of our application logic is basically inside, what I erroneously called the toggle machine, but it is like a Wordle machine, uh, more like. And so um, you could essentially, I mean, if you're brave enough, I don't know if we have time today, but you could take this machine, put it in view, and basically have the exact same Wordle game without having to re-implement much of anything except for the view logic, just because Vue and React do things a little bit differently. Angular, Svelte, they all do things a little bit differently on the Vue layer. But this is sort of like Docker for your app logic. We put it in a nice container,
Right.
and then you just deploy it anywhere.
I mean, this is really, I'm kind of blown away by how little code is required to make the full game.
Yeah.
It's so cool to see how concise, because the big complaint that you hear about state machines is that state machines are a lot of boilerplate. There's a lot going on here. But I'm trying to
Mhm.
think about how I would write this without a state machine. And I have a hunch that there'd probably be a little more code than this.
Probably. And that's because you would probably opt to use Boolean values like did user guess, is revealing, is playing animation, it would be like.
Right.
So then you're mixing view concerns with logic concerns. But yeah, so yeah, you could also implement this as a big reducer. But here's the problem with that. If you do this in a reducer and you use Redux or something like that, you also need a way of just specifying side effects. And it might not be apparent over here, but we do have the side effect of after 2 seconds, we're going from the revealing states to another state. And so you might have to write another use effect to express, okay, after 2000 seconds, or sorry, 2000 milliseconds, we're going to transition states. But now that logic does not live with your core logic, even though it technically is still core game logic. And that's
Right.
one thing that also, just going back to an original question, that's one thing that also differentiates XState as a state orchestration library from state management libraries, is that state management libraries tend to, just keep things like state only. But as a
Yeah.
state orchestration library, we have the additional responsibility of dealing with side effects and timers and things like that. Those are side effects.
Yeah. Okay, so question from Sean Grove: is it still easy to extract state machines from the toggle machine code and visualize edit it later? So assuming a developer changed it and maybe you want to rebuild it on every CI or PR.
So you want to visualize it, or you want to? Sorry.
I
You're,
think the question is around, like, pulling out the edited application code to build a visualization on every, like, PR. And the reason I think that is because
oh,
Sean's on the Netlify team and he's working on Netlify Graph, and I can hear the gears in his head turning right now.
yeah, yeah. So if Matt is still in the chat, he could probably speak to that more. But he actually made a GitHub bot that whenever you make a state machine, and we have this all over our code base, but whenever you make a state machine, it's going to comment and be like, here's the visual representation of that state machine, which is pretty cool. But that's something that I would love to work on further, just because it brings that extra dimension of understanding code, in pull requests. So, but
And
in terms of, sorry, go ahead.
well, the question I was going to ask is, like, the thing that I can see getting tricky is, like, with something like this does not break the visualizer, like this kind of code.
No, it doesn't. So this is not something, since we're just starting from X state. This isn't something where you would you would go from the editor to this, at least not quite yet. We're working on inline implementations. But as far as visualizing, lines 8 through 11, if you uncomment those, you're going to see like our new inspector. Yeah, just do that, reload, and it's going to open a pop-up window. So if you have pop-up windows blocked, then you might not see it. Yeah, this is a good pop-up, not a bad pop-up. Oh yeah, so you also have to, there's one more step to do if you're not seeing it, but, oh wait, no, the dev tool should be true. So if you go ahead and reload it.
Reload this one?
Reload the code sandbox.
Okay, so I'm gonna reload the code sandbox. And I think I'm gonna have to uncomment. No, it's still uncommented. Okay.
Interesting. So what is supposed to happen is you're supposed to get the visual representation of the machine on the left. Maybe exit this window and reload it. I promise you this works a lot more smoothly than
Might need to like
than it
permanently
seems.
let me allow pop-ups.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because it's trying to communicate with a separate window. So, okay, there we go. So if you drag that out, oops, sorry, I guess you have to make that bigger, and then you could zoom in.
Oh, zoom in here.
Yeah. There we go. Okay, so this is actually visualizing that application logic, and it doesn't matter how you code it. Like you could have those inline expressions and everything, but this represents your application logic as the game is playing. So if you go back to the Wordle game and make a guess, you'll see it go to like even just type corgi just to see that you're in the winning state.
Whoops. Got to be in here.
Yeah. So press enter. Okay, it's in the revealing state, and then it goes to the win state.
Right. So we just visualized the internal functionality of the app.
Mm-hmm.
And if I were to change one of these things, for example, I could say, just going to change the name here. Then
yeah, make sure it changes on the state as well.
Oh, right.
If you change the initial state.
Got it. Here we go. Oh, come on. Okay, this was a bad initial set. But if I change, okay, let's change the
or add a state,
Oh yeah, let's add a state. That seems better.
Like let's do a statistics or whatever, like just that final state of showing, hey, here's your stats.
Okay, so we can do stats, and right now we just leave it right here. It is.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So as we're editing the app, we're seeing these changes come in, just kind of straight up, which is pretty wonderful. And then we could do something like if you go to the one state, we could kind of immediately move, right? Which would be, it would be on. Let me see if I remember how an X state works. Empty, and then I would go to stats.
So first of all, I'm very impressed that you remember that. Secondly, there's now an easier way to do that. Just do always, because you said like when we go here, we always want to take this transition. So just say always and then stats. And yeah, it's a lot less awkward than doing the empty quotation marks during which.
Oh, that's
yeah.
That's so this is great. So we will always run this, and like the reason that you would have two transitions, for example, is maybe I want to fire off an event to track the stats, like track the win-loss counter or something like that, right? And then
exactly.
Yeah. This is, I mean, I don't know. What do you think, chat? How are you feeling about state machines? Who here is gonna give this a shot, right?
Yeah, hopefully everyone.
Hopefully everyone. And I did see a lot of people were subscribing today, so thank you very much for the subs. I appreciate it. Sean is asking, any plans for visual diffs on state machines for quickly understanding important changes in a PR?
Yeah, so that's something that we're starting to think about as a team as well. So the interesting thing with state machines and directed graphs in general is that a code diff doesn't really do you much good, because there's this thing called well, what's it called, like isometric machines, or it's isomorphic machines or graphs, where two graphs might have nodes in different places or whatever, or they might have different names, but they're essentially the same graph. Like there's the same number of arrows coming in and out of every node. And so what we want to do in the future is just explore ways of, just like you're saying, visually diffing machines. So if JSON goes and adds a state or like changes a transition, all I want to see is like green for this state was added, or red for this transition was deleted, or maybe orange for this transition was moved from there to here. And there's a lot of interesting ideas around that. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even like just showing the two side by side and highlighting the stuff that's not identical is interesting. Like there's, yeah, I love the fact that we've been talking about this for under 90 minutes, and multiple people have come up with things that they would want to use this for, and like it's like one step to make it useful for that, as opposed to like, well, what if we invented this and then that changed, and then you know what I mean? It's like, oh, well, all
Right.
right, so we've
Yeah.
got this map of the thing. I want to see the difference between this one and the last one. Great. Okay, one step. We can go figure that out. We want to see, we want to see the ability to like port them back and forth. Great. It's like it's very telling, I think, how much utility there is in these state machines. And so I think this is one of those things where like the hardest part of something like this is, I would guess, inertia, right? Because my inertia says, well, I'll just write if statements. And if I overcome that, I get all these benefits. And once you've done this a few times, I imagine for you, you never write if statements. You just open up a state machine like as the beginning of mapping out a project, right?
So I will say sometimes I am guilty of where I'm like, this is going to be a simple problem. Like I could like write a state machine, which, will not take long, maybe a couple of minutes, or I could just like use set state and that'll take a few seconds to do. And then I always regret it later because at least for things that get more complicated. And we've even like, I guess you could call it reverse dogfooding, but like we've reverse dogfooded this in our own editor, because I was making very sloppy prototype code just to get this editor working, like I want to say a year ago. So not the current state of the editor, but like just how the editor was in the past. And there were parts where I just desperately needed a state machine. And there are still parts of the code base where we were like, hey, this is a bit buggy. We need a state machine to really smooth these areas out. In fact, and I know it's sort of like weird to be exposing our own bugs, but like one of them is if you go into the editor and you drag an event, and then the event is selected and you drag it again, it's going to highlight the text instead of actually dragging that event. And so the solution to that was literally using a state machine and saying like, hey, if we're in the dragging state, we don't want to be highlighting text. And so these are types of, bugs and fixes that are both easy to recognize and easy to fix when you have state machines, because everything becomes an event, and either an event isn't firing, or an event is firing and going to a state that you don't expect, or neither of the above are happening. And so it's just that's going to immediately tell you where you fix the bug. So yeah, just understanding problems in terms of state machines really also makes things a lot easier.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that idea of like dragging versus editing, I've dealt with that before, and I think the way I dealt with it was to just completely ignore it. I was like, well, just don't click on the text when you want to drag this. Like you add a dragging
Right.
bar instead of some, you know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
in thinking about how the state you're in makes it way more approachable to deal with that, as opposed to trying to juggle two active things. You just, deactivate the one that's not in the current state. Perfect. Like yeah, you can just see the complexity falling away from implementation. And it comes from thinking up front about how your app is complex.
Right. And at the same time, I don't want to just tell everyone, hey, you must be using Xstate for all of these like complex apps. Something Jason talked about beforehand was being able to use these tools as planning tools and design tools and just understanding, okay, here's all the events that could happen in my app, but I prefer to use Redux or some other state management library. And that's totally fine. Like what I want developers to get at, like with all of this, is that, everything is an event or a state or a transition, and they all fit together and create like this map of your application logic that can be understood by everyone. And it's up to you to implement it however you want. Xstate's the most straightforward if you are already designing it with state machines in mind. But yeah, it's just that idea of modeling states that I feel is so important and worth emphasizing.
Yeah, it's so good. Okay, so is this the right place to give people more resources, or did you want to show anything else off? We've got about
I think this is good for now, and I'd love to point people to the resources we have.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's where should somebody go if they want to go further? They want to do more with Stately, with Xstate, with state machines in general.
So I would say definitely our Discord. That's the number one place where we're going to be just announcing stuff and telling you about like just features we're adding to the editor and registry and the VS Code extension and all of that, and especially the open source stuff too. One of our biggest priorities right now is working on Xstate version 5, which is going to improve a lot of things in version 4, including typing. I promise we're definitely working on that. So I would say the Discord, our GitHub at github.com/statelyai. You could take a look at everything we've done. The visualizer, by the way, is completely open source. So if you want to poke around, maybe embed that somewhere, go ahead, take that visualizer. It's written in React and Next.js. So, take it and run with it. And also the discussions there are really, really fruitful. There's people with lots of use cases and questions and ideas, and we try to answer them as diligently as we can. We also have YouTube, youtube.com/statelyai. That's where we post all of our office hours. And we do it about every week. We're not going to be doing it this week, but, roughly every Friday. And this is where we give you updates on everything we're working on and everything that we're planning on working on too. So that's the primary resource for that. And you could also jump into these and ask us questions if you want. Try and think of other resources, the documentation as well, but those are our main avenues. We also have a Twitter, twitter.com/statelyai.
Stately AI.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. Everybody keep up on that. All right. So, David, this was super informative, super stoked. There's a lot of people who are in the chat talking about how excited they are about using state machines now. So I hope to see a lot of state machines coming out of people. I know I'm going to be revisiting my motivation to get these done, push through that inertia, and put this into my planning stack again. Let's go ahead and do one more shout to David here. Go follow on Twitter. And we've also had Ashley with us all day doing live captioning. So thank you so much, Ashley, for being here. That is made possible through White Coat Captioning, and the sponsors pay for that. So Netlify, NX, Backlight, all kicking in to make the show more accessible, and do other things like keep the lights on, let me build new stuff, get camera gear, all the things that I need to do to make this show great. So thank you all very much for that. While you're checking out things on the site, make sure you go and check out the schedule. We've got so much incredible stuff coming up. Next week, we're going to have B. Dougie back on the show, and we're going to talk about open source contributions. I would love to see you there. We got to get more people into open source. And all right, with that, I think we're going to call this one a success. David, any parting words?
Yeah, also visit our blog, stately.ai/blog. We're going to post a lot of info there too. So just another resource for you.
One more resource.
Yeah. But yeah, this was a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for being here. Chat, as always, thank you for hanging out. We will see you all next time.